The moment I saw a dog on my porch with a blue men's jacket in its teeth, something inside me broke, and at the same time came alive. It felt as if life itself had rebelled against logic. The jacket looked worn, but not as if it had spent 4 long years in a damp forest. For years. That's exactly how long it had been since my husband, Thomas, disappeared. I don't remember dropping my cup. I only remember the sound of shattering porcelain and the feeling of my heart stopping. The jacket was unmistakably his, the frayed collar, the familiar marks where patches had once been. I always joked that Thomas wore it more often than he changed his socks. The dog stood silently, watching me with eyes that held an almost human intelligence, as if he understood the horror of what was unfolding. I couldn't help but speak to him. "Hey, buddy, where did you get this? Where is Thomas?" The dog only tilted his head, continuing to study me with those hypnotic eyes, and let out a quiet whimper. A worn leather collar hung around his neck, but there were no tags. I crouched down to touch the fabric, damp and sticky with dirt, and suddenly, a small piece of paper slipped from the breast pocket. My heart clenched. Even though the ink was smeared from moisture, I recognized the handwriting instantly. "My dearest Ellen, if you're reading this, it means I'm in trouble." The next words had dissolved into nothing but stains, but at the very end, faded and barely legible, were the words, "I love you, always." A wave of emotions crashed over me, wild hope or sheer despair. I couldn't tell. Could he be alive? For 4 years, everyone believed Thomas had died in the mountains. But if this jacket wasn't just some remnant left behind and taken by scavengers, if it had been preserved, carried, and brought to me by this strange dog, I pressed the fabric to my face. Even through the musty scent of the forest, a faint trace of his cologne lingered. Tears welled up in my eyes. The dog nudged my hand with his muzzle, as if comforting me. His gaze was filled with understanding. As I pulled myself together, the dog cautiously followed me inside the house. I dialed the number of Peter Martinez, a former detective who had worked on Thomas's case. He had been retired for years, but he always told me, "Ellen, if anything ever comes up, anything, call me." I didn't expect him to pick up so quickly. I hesitated for a moment when I heard his rough voice on the other end. "Ellen, everything okay? I think I have evidence that Thomas might still be alive." The words barely left my throat. Silence. The pause on the other end felt unbearably long. Finally, Peter spoke. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. I hung up and looked down at the dog. In his eyes, I saw unwavering certainty, assurance that I was doing the right thing. And then, I noticed something strange. The seams of the jacket, they didn't look like they had been exposed to years of rain, wind, and snow. The fabric was slightly worn, yes, but not deteriorated from lying out in the open for 4 years. As I searched the pockets for any clues, I found only an empty candy wrapper, a small plastic container, and a broken lighter. The dog suddenly barked, as if sensing something important. His gaze shifted toward the door. At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. "All right, let's go," I said to the dog, who confidently followed me to the hallway. Peter stepped in, shaking the raindrops from his coat. His sharp, experienced eyes immediately landed on the jacket and the dog. "That dog," he muttered. I frowned. "What about him?" Peter exhaled deeply, his expression darkening. "This is the same dog the rescuers talked about 4 years ago. They called him the Mountain Guardian. Said he helps lost hikers find their way back." A chill ran down my spine. For the first time in years, something inside me burned. A deep, unsettling intuition. As if everything happening was part of a larger mystery. We decided to follow the dog if he tried to lead us anywhere. And sure enough, he did. Without hesitation, the dog set off toward the forest, moving with a confidence that made it seem as if he knew exactly where he was going. Until now, I had been too afraid to set foot in the depths of the wilderness where Thomas had vanished. But now, this tiny spark of hope and Peter's steady presence gave me courage. A light rain began to fall as we pushed through the thick underbrush. My heart ached at the memories of those frantic search efforts. 3 relentless days of patrols, search teams scouring every inch of the mountains. But nothing. All they found was his backpack, deep in the forest. That moment had been devastating. The forest around us was eerily silent. The dog navigated around fallen trees with ease, pausing at rocky outcrops as Peter and I scrambled behind him, earning scratches and scrapes. It was clear he knew where he was going. Eventually, we emerged at a ravine. Winding trails led downward, toward the old abandoned mines sealed off years ago. Peter crouched at the entrance, studying the stone structure, his face dark with concern. He slowly shook his head. "Do you see these fresh tracks?" Peter ran a finger over a barely visible boot print. A chill ran through me. That meant someone had been visiting the mine all this time. Could it have been Thomas? Or was it someone else entirely? But why? We moved deeper inside, using our flashlights and following Peter's advice. He knew how to navigate places like this. Every step was careful, deliberate, to avoid triggering a collapse. The dog ran ahead, then circled back, making sure we weren't falling behind. Almost immediately, we found fresh evidence. Someone had been conducting geological surveys inside. Scraps of cables, a couple of discarded rubber gloves, and remnants of ampoules used for sample testing. I felt a sharp sting of professional curiosity. Thomas was a geologist. He knew these rock formations better than anyone. If he had discovered something truly valuable, it could have attracted the attention of powerful people. "Ellen," Peter whispered, his voice tense. "Look at this." My footsteps creaked against the floor as I approached. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw a small clearing filled with scattered equipment. Radiation detectors, USB flash drives, abandoned rock samples, and, most unsettling of all, food wrappers. Not old ones. Someone had been coming and going. Someone was here. I bent down and noticed a familiar emblem on one of the discarded packages. The logo of the company that had once sponsored Thomas's research. A deep unease twisted in my gut. Then, the silence of the mine was pierced by a faint sound. Music. A slow, crackling tune, as if an old radio had tuned into a barely audible frequency. The melody was painfully familiar. Wonder. A song Thomas and I used to play in the mornings while making coffee. This felt like a nightmare. The sound lured us deeper into the tunnels. And then, in the main chamber, I saw it. A dark figure hunched over a piece of equipment. A surge of instinct made me want to scream, "Thomas!" But I froze when I felt Peter's firm grip on my shoulder. The detective gave a sharp motion for silence. We took a cautious step forward, and the dog barked, loud. The figure jerked upright, spun around, and I barely stifled a gasp. A mask covered the man's face. In his hands, a flashlight pointed straight at us, blinding. Who are you?" I stammered. "The question isn't for us," the masked man replied coldly. "It's for you. This mine is off limits." Suddenly, from behind a metal partition, 2 more men emerged. One of them sneered when he saw the dog. "This damn stray again. The one that always wanders here." Then his gaze flicked to me. His brows lifted. "Ellen Morrison. Persistent, aren't you? Just like your stubborn husband." A lump formed in my throat. They knew Thomas. They knew he was my husband. And from the cruel twist of their smiles, they knew why he had disappeared. "Where is he?" I shouted, unable to contain it any longer. The masked man let out a bitter chuckle. "Perhaps," he said, "we'll arrange a little reunion for you. But everything comes with a price." The dog bared his teeth, sensing the menace in their voices. Peter tensed beside me, but we were trapped. No weapons, no backup. We couldn't risk provoking them into violence. One of the men whispered something to another, an order, it seemed, to detain us. At that moment, the dog lunged, snapping at them, distracting them just long enough. "You're looking for Thomas?" Another man spoke up, his voice filled with quiet amusement. "He's talented, but not clever enough to outmaneuver us. He got himself involved in something far bigger than he understood." A sudden realization struck me. The jacket. I had barely searched the pockets. With a shaky hand, I reached inside. My fingers closed around a small plastic case. I opened it. A USB drive. Thomas had hidden something important. Something they didn't want anyone to find. A sinking feeling told me the truth. They were keeping Thomas somewhere nearby, forcing him to cooperate. And the dog. He was the only one who had been running free back and forth, searching for help. Thomas had managed to get the jacket and the note to him. He believed that somehow I or someone would come. The two men accompanying us gave a sharp signal to follow them. If we wanted to make it out alive and find Thomas, we had no choice but to comply. The dog walked beside me, growling cautiously. They led us into a side tunnel, where a rusted door stood ajar. Something flickered beyond it. Behind the door was a deep cavern, filled with shimmering crystals and geological surveying equipment. In the corner, hunched over a table cluttered with tools and devices, was a man. He was in terrible shape, thin, disheveled. But I would recognize him anywhere. "Thomas!" My voice broke into a whisper. His wrists were cuffed to a metal pipe. He lifted his gaze, and for a moment time stood still. We hadn't seen each other in 4 years. His eyes, those familiar, beloved eyes, were filled with an ocean of pain. And yet there was joy too. I rushed toward him, but one of the masked men grabbed my shoulder, stopping me. "Your husband is a genius," he said smoothly. "But even he couldn't have done this without us. Are you sure you want to end this deal?" "No," I whispered, not understanding what he meant. "Why are you keeping him here?" Instead of answering, he gestured toward the massive stalactites of crystal. Peter sucked in a sharp breath. This is a deposit of unique minerals," he murmured. "If the data is correct, this could provide immense energy resources." He turned to the men. "What are you trying to do? Buy them all up? Or hide them? Less you know, the better you sleep." One of them sneered. It was clear now. Some powerful corporation wanted to monopolize the discovery, to keep it from the world. And Thomas had refused to cooperate. So they had made him a prisoner. I turned to him, my chest tightening. At any moment, this could all turn into a tragedy. "Tom, we thought you were dead. Forgive me." He shook his head. "Don't blame yourself." I tried to send a signal, but I realized too late who I was dealing with. His eyes flicked to the dog. "Max, he's been helping me all along." I sent him outside, hoping he'd find someone brave enough to see this through. Hearing his name, the dog wagged his tail softly. I remembered the torn scrap of paper. "Love you always." Tears burned my eyes. Then suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the passage. The ceiling rumbled. Rocks began to fall. From the distant corridor came a deep, growing roar. One of the masked men cursed. "Damn it! The mine's unstable. We need to get out." It was our chance. In the chaos, Peter lunged at one of the guards, knocking him down. Another tried to grab the dog, but Max twisted free, sinking his teeth into the man's sleeve. The attacker dropped his flashlight. I seized the moment. I snatched a keyring from the table and rushed toward Thomas. "Ellen, be careful," he shouted. But it was too late. A rough hand grabbed my wrist, trying to rip the keys away. At that exact moment, a deafening crash. Rocks collapsed from above. Light from the fallen flashlights flickered wildly across the walls. Max growled and lunged at the man holding me. We fell to the ground. Free again, I scrambled toward Thomas. The key slid into the lock. 1 turn, 2, 3. Finally, the damned mechanism gave way. Thomas pulled me into his arms. At last, we were together, even if we stood on the edge of a precipice. Peter groaned, catching his breath. 2 of the attackers lay motionless, buried under fallen debris. Another had disappeared into the dust and rubble. The mine was collapsing. "We have to go," Peter gasped. "Now." Thomas staggered to his feet, leaning on me and Max. The strong, sturdy man he had once been, only a memory now. Years in captivity had left their mark, but his spirit remained unbroken. We rushed toward the exit, the roar of collapsing tunnels behind us. A hurricane of fear and relief swirled inside me. I didn't know if the mine would hold, if we'd be buried alive. But one thought kept me moving. Thomas was here. We were together. We emerged just as dawn broke over the horizon. The rain had stopped. The world stood silent, and the first rays of sunlight pierced through the mist. Thomas tilted his face toward them. His expression twisted in both pain and wonder. For years without seeing the sunrise. Police arrived, and Peter immediately began explaining, pointing out where the remaining captors might be, how many officers would be needed to search the caves. Thomas was placed on a stretcher. The dog stayed by his side, unwavering. I sat beside him, taking his hand in mine. A strange mix of emotions washed over me. Happiness from our reunion, yet deep sorrow for all he had endured. "Forgive me," Thomas whispered, looking at me with exhausted eyes. "They threatened you. They said that if I didn't cooperate, they'd find a way to silence everyone I cared about. I couldn't let that happen." With trembling fingers, I brushed his damp hair from his face. "It's over now, Tom," I said softly. "They will answer for everything they've done. I swear." He gave a weak smile and closed his eyes. Max rested his head on Thomas's chest, as if guarding him. For a moment I thought this dog was a miracle. No one believed he would find a way to call for help. But he did. A year has passed since that day. A year spent helping Thomas recover from his terrible ordeal. A year of trials and interrogations. It was revealed that a powerful corporation had secretly planned to exploit the unique crystal deposit discovered by my husband. They had tried to buy him off. But Thomas could never do such a thing. He believed in science. He wanted his discovery to benefit all of humanity. Now we sit on the porch of our old home. I bring out 2 cups of coffee. Thomas is almost fully recovered, at least as much as one can after what he's been through. Max lies at my feet, watching us with his intelligent gaze, as if saying, "Well, I promised to fix everything, didn't I? You know?" Thomas says, giving Max a gentle pat. I had nearly lost hope. He was my only connection to the outside world while they held me captive. He brought me scraps of news, distracted the guards when I tried to leave messages. But most importantly, he reminded me. Out there, beyond those walls, someone was waiting for me. I smile, though tears sting my eyes. I wrap my arms around my husband. My heart beats steady, filled with gratitude. Gratitude that Thomas is alive, that we are together again, that we found the strength to fight, We both glance toward the distant mountains, where the cave lies hidden. Now, scientists and rescue workers are there, carefully extracting crystal samples. Soon, they promise to publish results that will revolutionize the understanding of renewable energy. The corporation that imprisoned Thomas has faced justice. The world knows the truth. Do you hear that? I whisper. The evening breeze carries the scent of pine and the faint melody of a distant storm, as if nature itself is saying, "You did it." Thomas doesn't answer. He only squeezes my hand. Max lets out a soft whimper, as if reminding us, he too played a part. Hearing his name, he lifts his head and wags his tail joyfully. I want to hug him to tell him how grateful I am. And in that moment, I realize the greatest mystery of our lives has already been solved. And no crystal, no worldwide recognition could ever compare to what truly matters. That we are together, that we can go on living. People often lose faith when it feels like the world is against them. But sometimes, a single loyal heart and a spark of love can achieve the impossible. We sit on the porch, arms wrapped around each other, watching the sunset over the mountains. And we understand, yes, life can be beautiful. And the most important thing is to never give up in your darkest hour. Because as soon as a sliver of hope appears, a true miracle can happen. And we are ready to share this story with anyone who has ever lost faith. To anyone who thought all was lost, let this story remind you of one simple truth. Even when the darkness seems endless, love and loyalty will always find a way through. Whether through dense forests, dangerous mines, or the conspiracies of powerful men. Sometimes, salvation comes in the form of a faithful dog, carrying an old jacket in his jaws, and with it, a chance for survival, a new life. And if this story has stirred something deep within you, share it with those you love. Let everyone know that true love and friendship can conquer anything, even mountains and walls, and sometimes, even entire corporations.